Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is the story about Naruto. What if Naruto haven't have Kurama? Part 1. Hope you'll enjoy this video. So before we start, please do support for more awesome content and also hit the subscribe button and share this video with your friends. And also support the creator of this fanfic. I have created many playlists. Check it out in the channel. So let's start the video. Minato Namikaze, the fourth Hokage and soon-to-be new father, paced back and forth in the hallway, his body tense and full of nervous energy. His famous overcoat, with stylized flames licking the bottom edge, and the words 4th Hokage written in large bold letters on the back, swirled around his feet as he moved. Every few seconds he threw a worried glance at the hospital doors that led to the room where his wife was currently in labor. He desperately wanted to do something, but knew that he would just get in the way. Tsunade-sama was overseeing the birth, after all. If something happened that she couldn't handle, there was little he would be able to do. It didn't stop him from imagining such scenarios, however, each more horrible and unlikely, he told himself firmly, than the last. Hokage-sensei, there's no need to worry so much. Kushina-sama is strong, I'm sure she'll be fine. Tsunade-sama won't let anything happen to her, after all. Kakashi said lazily, never taking his eyes off his ever-present orange book. His silver hair stuck straight up in the air, defying gravity, as it always did. His mask-covered face seemed to be smiling as he giggled to himself. Minato threw Kakashi an irritated glance, but he stopped pacing for the moment. "Why do you insist on calling me that? It sounds ridiculous," he snapped. Kakashi looked up from his book for a moment, and even through the mask Minato thought he could see a grin on his face. "You are the Hokage, and my teacher, after all. It's only proper." With that said, he turned back to his book, giggling again. The Hokage sighed. "Thanks for trying to distract me, but you're plenty worried about yourself. You've been reading that same page for the last 30 minutes. Kakashi stiffened in surprise, then shook his head. "It's a good page," he insisted. Minato let out a snort of laughter, then paused. "Which page?" The masked ninja was definitely grinning this time as he opened his mouth to answer. Before he could, however, an unearthly roar reverberated throughout the hospital hallway, rattling windows and stopping the two shinobi cold. The roar was more than just loud, more than just sound even. It was laced with an incredibly potent chakra, and just feeling it nearly brought them to their knees. The roar felt terrifying, it felt overwhelmingly powerful, it felt evil. Minato recovered first and quickly grabbed Kakashi's shoulder. With a yellow flash of light they both disappeared as shouts began to ring out throughout the hospital. A few minutes before, Makai, the demon realm, the Kyuubi no Yauko lay before the swirling vortex that was the portal to the human realm, waiting patiently. Barren plains stretched out all around him, silent and desolate. His 9 tails swayed lazily behind him, moving seemingly at random, stirring the air and creating dust clouds as they moved. Soon the period of his banishment would be over. Soon, very soon, he would enter the human realm once more. He had waited 100 years for this moment, 100 years of bitter, frustrated anger, 100 years of planning. 100 years of wondering what had become of his brethren. 100 years since those pathetic humans wielding their silly little powers had dared to turn against him. When they had launched their attack, he had been amused. Amused that they were so arrogant as to believe that mere humans, even working together, could ever hope to so much as inconvenience a Biju. Then they had revealed the full extent of their plan and summoned the death god. He laughed outright at that. They apparently believed that demons such as he were mortal and thus could be killed in such a manner. Fools. He was shocked when he was sealed into a human child. He had not thought the human's plan would work even to that extent. His shock quickly turned to rage, and he flooded the seal containing him with all his power, seeking to break free and wreak havoc upon those who would dare stand against him. His power quickly overwhelmed the seal, as he had expected. What he had not expected was to be forcibly ripped from the human realm and sent back to the demon realm immediately after that occurred. He had barely had time to witness the devastation unleashed by the shattering of the seal before he had been banished. While satisfied that he had killed the humans involved in the attack, he did not feel victorious. For a time, he assumed that the humans would soon banish his brethren as well, if they had not already done so. He wanted to confer with the others before returning to the human world and had sent emissaries to the other tribes calling for a meeting. After a year had passed without any sign of them in the demon realm and without any word through their tribes, he had been forced to consider that the sealing array had been meant for some other purpose. Whatever the humans had failed to accomplish in their attack on him had apparently succeeded elsewhere. His brethren were still in the human realm and lacked both the means to communicate and the power to move freely between the realms. Then had come the unwelcome discovery that the Death God had sealed the portal against him. With bitter clarity he now recalled the words the Death God had spoken to the human summoner, words he had dismissed as unimportant at the time, banished from the human realm for a period of 100 years. Thus is the agreement. He was pulled from his reminiscence as he felt the portal change, the feeling of the Death God's power fading away, as if it had never been. With a victorious roar, he leapt to his feet and bounded through the portal, fully intent on finding his brethren and exacting revenge on the humans who would dare interfere with the Bijuu. -6:35 p.m. Konoha's western wall. Minato landed on the outer walls of the village, already scanning the surround. All around the mother ninja were appearing on the wall, confused shouts coming from all sides as everyone tried to get a handle on the situation. Minato's voice cut through the din, strong and clear. Silence. Did anyone see the source of that roar? All the ninja, even the ones originally stationed on the wall, shook their heads. Minato frowned even as his eyes kept scanning in all directions. There was no sign of any disturbance, no smoke, no chakra emanations that he could detect. He began snapping orders to the ninja assembled around him. Within moments, squads were spreading throughout the village to check for any damage, while others were heading for the other posts to see if they had detected anything. Given the lack of physical evidence, they had to consider the possibility of a widespread attack. This might have been a preliminary test by enemy ninja hoping to find any holes in village security. It could also be relatively harmless harassment, but none of them believed they were that lucky. Saratobi appeared a few moments later clad in his battle armor and looking every inch the veteran shinobi. Minato felt a little pride when Saratobi nodded approvingly at him. His predecessor was clearly pleased to see that Minato had responded so quickly and effectively. "Minato," what he began to ask, but his voice cut off abruptly as his face paled and his eyes whitened in horror. Minato turned quickly to follow his gaze and felt his own face go pale. Miles away yet still clearly visible stood a large form, glowing orange, as the sun slowly set behind it. He sent chakra to his eyes, sharpening his sight as best he could. With his enhanced vision he could just make out the form of something akin to a fox, towering hundreds of feet above the trees. His heart nearly stopped when he saw that there were 9 flowing tails spread out behind the fox. "Dear Kami, a tailed beast. 9 tails," he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. It had been nearly 30 years since the last tailed beast sighting, the 4-tailed gorilla in Iwa. The beast had battled the ninja forces of Iwa for nearly 2 days, laying waste to the countryside with its lava. Countless ninja had lost their lives battling the creature, and some areas in Iwa still had not recovered. Legend said that the more tails such a beast possessed, the more powerful it was. If the 4-tailed beast could do so much damage to Iwa, he shuddered to think how much damage this one could do, especially if it reached the village. Konoha was the only great village to have escaped the ravages of the tailed beasts. Their good fortune had helped them flourish beyond any other village, but it seemed their luck had finally run out. His mind raced, trying to remember everything he had ever heard about how to combat a tailed beast. The one thing all the reports agreed on was that the beasts were effectively immortal. No one had ever managed to kill one, or even seriously wound one, in all the battles that had taken place. Whether it was possible at all was a source of long-standing debate. Still, everyone agreed, however reluctantly, that such a feat was beyond the power of any ninja, no matter how powerful or numerous. The only successful strategy was, specifically, containment seals tied to a living host. There were rumors that Suna had managed to contain the 1-tailed beast into an object for a time, but the container had failed within a week and unleashed the beast to once again ravage Wind Country. No other tailed beast had ever been sealed into an inanimate object that he knew of. The reports he had heard also suggested that the younger the host, the better. Several adult ninja, and even a few teenagers, had been selected as hosts, only to have their bodies swiftly begin to break down under the strain. They had died, and the beasts were released or resealed within a year at most. Further complicating matters, the containment seal used had to be of sufficient power relative to the tailed beast it would contain. The seal holding back the 1-tailed beast had proven wholly insufficient when the village hidden in the grass had attempted to use it on the 3-tailed beast. That failed attempt and the disastrous aftermath had weakened the grass village to such an extent that it was still trying to recover over 50 years later. Minato's mind swiftly sorted through all the information he had available and determined the best course of action. To seal the nine-tailed beast, he would have to use the strongest seal possible on the youngest container possible. He already has a seal in mind, one which summoned the god of death itself. He had been researching it out of curiosity, wondering what would lead someone to design such a seal that cost the life of its user. He supposed he knew the answer to that question now, though he wished he did not. As for the host, a child that was newly born would be the best. A child that was born today, such as. His mind shied away from following that thought to its conclusion. He snapped out of its musings when he heard Sarutobi call for him again. "Minato?" Sarutobi said sharply. "You need to begin the evacuation." Minato shook himself and nodded. He drew in a slow breath, then spoke. "I need volunteers to slow the beast's advance. The remaining ninja and anyone of genin rank will begin evacuating the civilians as quickly as possible. Sarutobi, I need you to organize the resistance." His voice trailed off for a moment as he mind grappled with what he was about to do, what he was about to sacrifice. "I need to prepare for the sealing," he finished quietly. Sarutobi nodded his acceptance. Unsurprisingly, every ninja on the wall volunteered to delay the beast. Minato smiled. It was a sad smile, but proud all the same. "Thank you all. It has been an honor to lead you." With a yellow flash, he was gone. Minato reappeared in his lab and immediately rushed to his worktable. The seal to summon the power of the god of death was already spread out on the table, right where he had left it. The notes he had managed to pull together after weeks of exhaustive research lay off to the side. That information, beyond the requirements for using the seal itself, didn't even fill a page. He reviewed his own notes, realizing that he had made very little progress in understanding the underlying mechanics of the sealing array. The most useful piece of information was a scribbled note on the back of the sealing scroll. It wasn't by the original author, the handwriting was clearly different, but it contained more information than all the journals he had scoured to this point. The first test of the seal was successful, but too costly. The target was sealed, but when we lowered the protective barrier, Kenichi was dead. We examined the body, but found no discernible cause of death. It seems that the god of death is not to be summoned lightly. Minato had been unable to determine what they had tested the seal on, or even who had written the note. Nonetheless, it was confirmation that the strongest seal design he had ever seen worked. He would just have to hope it was enough to contain the nine-tailed beast. He rolled up the design for the sealing array along with his brushes and inks, then disappeared in another yellow flash. -7:20 p.m. Konoha General Hospital. Tsunade gently handed the bundle containing Kushina's newborn son to the exhausted mother, smiling at the look of joy upon Kushina's face. Kushina looked haggard, her hair sticking to her sweaty face and her clothing rumpled and stained, but Tsunade thought she had never looked happier in her life. "Have you settled on a name yet?" she asked. Shizune, Tsunade's apprentice and assistant, looked on with a smile, wiping away a happy tear. "Naruto," Kushina said. She moved her hand and gently smoothed back the small tufts of golden hair that decorated the baby's head. "His name is Naruto." Tsunade and Shizune smiled fondly, glancing at each other in amusement as they wondered if the name was supposed to mean fish cake or maelstrom. Though they would never say it, they thought either meaning equally likely considering Minato and Kushina's shared love of ramen. Tsunade shook herself as she collected her thoughts. "Right. You are stable, Naruto is healthy, and everything is fine here. I hate to leave so soon, but something is happening outside Shizune, and I need to be out there to help. We'll be back as soon as we can." Kushina tensed as her senses, previously overwhelmed by the agony of childbirth, finally detected the ongoing battle. She nodded quickly, holding Naruto a little tighter as she wondered what was happening outside. -7:30 p.m. 2 miles west of Konoha. Kyuubi flicked his tail, and 3 more ninjas died. Mindful of the events that led to his banishment, he dispatched any attackers quickly and efficiently. Though it amused him to watch the humans expend their energy attempting to harm him, they had proven that they could inconvenience him if allowed the opportunity. There was no real reason to stay in the area anyway, as he had already determined that there was no trace within 100 miles. Still, he wasn't about to ignore the fact that these humans had attacked him unprovoked. They had clearly forgotten just why the Bidyu were to be feared. It seemed a little. The reminder was in order before he resumed his search. Kyuubi opened his mouth and began to gather into a large ball that filled the space between his gaping jaws. Even as they grew denser and denser, he could feel the humans gathering in one area, roughly a mile away and some distance from the village. It seemed they were planning to attack him en masse. The Kyuubi would have smirked if the ball of energy would have allowed it. After a few more seconds of gathering, he closed his jaws around the ball, completely encasing it. Same time. Konoha's western wall. Sarutobi gripped the wall tightly, his knuckles white and his face grim. They had succeeded in delaying the beast, giving Minato precious minutes to prepare the sealing array that would hopefully stop the beast once and for all. They had succeeded, but the death toll was horrifying. Over 100 ninja, from 2, were already dead, and he feared many more would follow if Minato did not arrive soon. Desperate for any option that would not result in further loss of life, he had directed his teammates Kaharu and Hamura to gather ninja in a clearing outside the village to prepare for a large-scale ninjutsu. They were to split the ninja into groups based on elemental affinity, and by now nearly 200 ninja should be pouring their chakra into joint elemental dragon techniques. This plan of attack was sound in theory, but he was unsure if the dragons would have any impact on the tailed beast despite their considerable power. All their other techniques, including individual versions of the dragon technique, had proven largely ineffective. On the other hand, while they may not be doing any discernible damage, the tailed beast was at least treating them as threats, if the way it swiftly destroyed any ninja who came near it was any indication. Hopefully this long-range attack would slow it down without costing any more ninja their lives. He squinted his eyes, watching, as the Kyuubi began gathering energy into a ball in front of its mouth. He'd never heard of a tailed beast using this sort of attack before, but the amount of chakra gathered into the orb was staggering and still growing at an alarming rate. All the ninja approaching the beast scattered immediately, but the beast made no move to attack, instead continuing to gather more chakra into the orb. Whatever it was trying to do, it seemed very slow and highly ineffective. Then the beast swallowed the whole thing. Sarutobi blinked, trying to figure out what the point of. The blast that issued forth from the beast's maw was nearly blinding in its intensity. He let out a yell of pain as he covered his eyes and felt a wall of heat slam into him, searing his skin. He was nearly blown off his feet, but quickly recovered and tried to determine what happened, forcing his eyes open and ignoring the pain with practiced ease. A trench nearly half a mile wide and several miles long had been carved into the landscape. What had once been a lush, verdant forest was now a smoking ruin, every trace of life obliterated by the nine-tailed beast's blast. At the edges of the trench, trees had been torn from the ground and flung back, and fires were raging for hundreds of feet on either side. Sarutobi gaped. If that blast had been pointed at Konoha, half the city would have been destroyed. As it was, a huge swath of the forest surrounding the village had just been obliterated in a single attack. He could only thank Kami that the beast had such a terrible aim. Judging by the trench the attack had left behind, it hadn't even come close to. He gasped, and his face took on a look of horror as he mentally traced the path of the blast. It ran straight through the clearing where the ninja had gathered to fuel the elemental dragon techniques. Now there was no sign of the clearing and no sign of any shinobi that had been in it. Sarutobi prayed Minato completed his preparations quickly. He didn't think they would be able to hold out much longer. -7:45 p.m. Konoha General Hospital. Minato barely managed to choke out the words "I'm sorry" before he disappeared from the hospital room. -7:50 p.m. Konoha's western wall. Sarutobi. Gathering all available ninja and preparing to power a barrier technique around the beast, Minato called out as soon as he appeared beside the former Hokage. "I need you to keep it contained so I can perform the sealing. Throw this inside the barrier just before you activate it." Minato tossed one of his signature three-pronged kunai to the old man and disappeared. Sarutobi caught the kunai easily and nodded grimly. He had seen the bundle in Minato's arms and had a fairly good idea which child he would be using as the container for the tailed beast. He just hoped they could hold out long enough to activate the barrier. -7:55 p.m. 2 miles west of Konoha. Kyuubi laughed quietly as he felt the humans circling around him, spread out evenly yet keeping their distance. After he had unleashed the menacing ball on their little gathering, all the attacks had ceased. He even waited for several minutes to see if they would respond, reveling in their terror. A few more deaths, perhaps another menacing ball, and the lesson would be firmly planted in their minds. Still, he really should stop playing around with the humans, he mused. His initial anger at their attack had rapidly cooled with every human he killed, and now he felt more bored and impatient than anything. After a few more moments compilation, he decided that one last attack should suffice, then he could move on to his real objective. He began to gather power for another menacing ball, this one aimed at the next highest concentration of humans with their odd power. For some reason, they were gathering within a mountain, behind what appeared to be human faces carved into the side. Were they expecting to hide from him now, after they had attacked him at first sight? He stopped, the menacing ball swiftly dissipating, when the barrier snapped into place around him. This was disturbingly familiar. Then a giant toad appeared in a cloud of smoke. That was new. It had been a long time since he battled anything from the outer realm, and given the outcome from the last time he was surprised one dared show its face in front of him. Then he detected the two humans on the toad's head, one adult, with the largest concentration of energy in his body he had felt since his return, and a tiny child. He quickly grew alarmed as he realized just what was happening. -8 p.m. Inside the barrier. I just need you to keep the beast occupied while I complete it. Buy me some time, Bunta. Minato cried out, his hands flashing through seals so fast they appeared to be indistinct blurs. The bundle containing Naruto was nestled between his feet holding the bundle on Gamabunta's back as he anchored himself with chakra. Even as Minato finished speaking, the fox-like beast snarled and shot forward, tails swinging in from all angles to strike at the giant toad. Minato's knees almost buckled as Gamabunta shot into the air to avoid the strikes, but his hands never stopped moving. That's easy for you to say, brat. Gamabunta called out, leaping into the air to dodge yet another strike. He pulled out his tanto to block, and the blade rattled in his hands as the beast's tails slammed into it repeatedly. This thing is strong and fast. Shit, its tail. The rest of his words were cut off in a scream of pain as the beast's claws raked across his face. One of its tails had wrapped around each of Gamabunta's arms, and another was currently wrenching the giant tanto out of his hands. Its claws were raised for another strike when it suddenly froze. A chill seemed to permeate the air, and even Gamabunta shivered as he felt something ancient and inexplicably others descended upon the battlefield. The beast's terrifying presence and seemingly limitless power paled in comparison to this feeling, and for a brief moment Minato wondered if he had only managed to make the situation worse. Minato watched silently as the presence seemed to coalesce in the space in front of him, hovering in the air between the tailed beast and Gamabunta. It appeared exactly as he had imagined, a skeletal figure clad in tattered black robes, a scythe gripped loosely in one bony hand. The boundary is sufficient, the vessel prepared. What shall be sealed? The death god asked, its voice echoing oddly within the barrier. Just hearing it sent tremors of pain throughout Minato's body. He worked his throat several times before he could force the words out. He had imagined many times what actually being in the presence of the god of death would be like. This coldness, this creeping emptiness that flowed from his extremities into the core of his body was far less than he had imagined, and yet somehow far, far worse. I want you to take the tailed beast soul to your realm and seal its power into my son, he said quickly, hoping to finish his task before he lost his composure entirely. He knew the price he would pay for summoning the god of death, and he was as prepared as he could be. At this point he just wanted it to be over. He spared a moment to wonder what the death god meant by the boundary being sufficient. There had been no specific mention of a boundary in the notes he had read, though he did recall that the test was performed inside a barrier. He had assumed it to be a standard precaution, but perhaps it was something more? The death god paused, then shifted its head slightly and looked at Minato. The Hokage's entire body convulsed, and he barely managed to avoid landing on Naruto as he fell to his knees, gasping. Demon King, do not fall within death's domain, the death god intoned. Minato paled. What? But. The death god spoke again, ignoring Minato. The Kyuubi no Yauko shall be sealed within the designated vessel for as long as the vessel is capable of enduring. Upon the failure of the vessel, the Kyuubi no Yauko shall be banished once again from the human realm for a period of 100 years. Thus is the agreement. Minato tried to protest, to ask why, but he found himself unable to speak. Then the death god moved. He vaguely heard Naruto begin to cry behind him, but his limbs seemed so heavy. His entire body was cold now and was swiftly growing numb. He thought Gamabunta was shouting something, but it seemed distant and terribly unimportant. The beast reacted with incredible speed as the death god stretched forth its hand, but even as it leapt into the air to gain distance, its body began to distort. The red energy that comprised its very being was inexorably pulled through the air, twisting and turning until it formed a vortex of power centered over the newborn child. A funnel stretched downward and connected to the seal written upon Naruto's stomach, and the entire vortex was slowly pulled into the seal. Naruto was screaming in pain, the sound ripping at Minato's ears and seeming to fill his entire world even as his vision grew dim. The entire process took less than a minute, but to Minato it felt like an eternity. The sealing is complete. All within death's domain, and the boundary shall be taken in payment. Thus is the agreement, the death god intoned. There was a moment of stillness, then the otherworldly presence vanished from the battlefield. His attention was suddenly diverted to the ground, where the previously green grass, what remained of it after the damage Gamabunta and the beast had done to the landscape, was swiftly turning brown. The leaves were dropping from the trees in torrents, the exposed wood turning gray and crumbling. Even as Minato's vision faded entirely, his mind churned, trying to process what the death god had said. Something was wrong with that statement. Something was. As the life faded from his eyes and his body stilled, he never noticed that Naruto had stopped crying. Kuishu, more commonly known as the nine-tailed demon fox, or even just the nine tails, was not annoyed. Nor was he upset. He was far beyond such pale words. He was furious. He had been sealed again. Sealed. Again. He wanted nothing more than to flood all his power through the seal and into his vessel to destroy it. He wanted to stomp out every last human life so that none would again dare inflict this indignity upon him. He wanted to scorch the land such that nothing would ever grow and every being in the human realm would realize the price for meddling with the Kyuubi no Yauko. He wanted to. He felt his churning as his emotions ran wild and knew that he was a mere moment away from giving in to his desires and releasing his full power. Even as his fury burned hotter, he forced him to calm down. He remembered all too well what happened the last time he gave in to his baser instincts, though only now that he was sealed again did he fully understand the circumstances. That pathetic human had attempted to steal his power using the assistance of the god of death, and this was the result. Kuishu played the death god's words back through his mind. The Kyuubi no Yauko shall be sealed within the designated vessel for as long as the vessel is capable of enduring. Upon the failure of the vessel, the Kyuubi no Yauko shall be banished once again from the human realm for a period of 100 years. Thus is the agreement. The designated vessel was clearly the human child, just as it had been 100 years ago. The question was, what constituted failure of the vessel? He was fairly certain he had completely obliterated the vessel the last time, along with the surrounding countryside, so his previous experience wouldn't be useful for the sake of comparison. He had only spent a brief time within the seal of the death god before, so he had not really paid attention to its appearance. This time, he paused to take in his surroundings. He was standing in the middle of an empty white room, large enough to comfortably contain his battle form. The room had 4 walls, each with a metal door set in the middle. The doors were large, but the tops only reached halfway up his legs. He looked up, but could make out nothing, no ceiling, no sky, just endless white. He moved to one of the doors, noting that it was currently closed. Upon closer inspection he could see that the door appeared to be fashioned of steel, as he would expect of human fortifications. Such objects were of incredible strength by human standards, after all. He checked for any sort of locking mechanism or handle, but found nothing. Experimentally, he lashed out with his claws and struck the door. He expected some sort of reaction, an energy barrier of some sort, or perhaps a physical sensation of resistance. He most certainly did not expect his claw to tear through the door, as if it were made of mere wood. Surprised, Kuishu paused to observe his surroundings. Other than the gaping hole in the door there was no change. Grinning, he began to condense in order to reduce the size of his current form, so he could fit through the door. He received another surprise, this one rather unpleasant, when the door began to shrink along with him. When he had reduced himself to only a few feet tall, the door stood barely 6 inches high. The rest of the room had become smaller, as well, so much so that he could easily stretch out his tails and touch the opposite wall. Changing his approach, Kuishu instead extended one of his tails through the open door and let his form dissolve into a mass of churning. As they passed through the opening, however, it began to grow even smaller. Even worse, the smaller the opening was, the harder it was for more to leave the room. When he flexed his to make the opening larger, the entrance room shook, and small cracks began appearing in the walls. He stopped flexing immediately and watched as the cracks slowly began to seal themselves. He also noted that the opening had grown ever so slightly larger. Storing that away for future reference, he turned his attention to that which was outside the room. As a being composed entirely of the stream of energy outside the room was as much himself as the massive inside the room was. What he found outside the room was troubling, to say the least. He could sense with surprising clarity the state of the child he was sealed into. He could discern the various organs, the pathways through which blood flowed, and even the outlines of what appeared to be paths for chakra, as the humans called their power. He had never been concerned with the particulars of human physiology, or any other living creature for that matter, but he knew enough in general to understand that the various organs were supposed to be doing something. Currently, none of the organs are working. The heart was not beating, the blood was not flowing, the chakra was not moving. Actually, that wasn't quite true. As he moved throughout the body, the nearby organs reacted. The heart started to beat again, and the blood started to flow. Even the chakra reacted, circulating throughout the body, some of it even moving closer to the and curling around it. Whenever that happened, it caused a strange tingling sensation that Kuishu had never felt before. The chakra would always settle down when he moved away from it, so he decided to ignore it for the time being. Kuishu withdrew as much as possible while still being able to sense the child's body and watched. Without him, the body quickly shut down again. He waited for several seconds, watching for any activity anywhere within the body. Nothing happened. It took him another few seconds to realize what the problem was, but when he did, a wave of panic shot through him. The child was dead. He was certain the child had been alive prior to the sealing, so either the sealing process itself or the presence of the death god had cost the child its life. Kuishu braced himself, certain that he would be sent back to Makai again any moment now. Several more seconds passed, but nothing happened. Confusion swept through him, and he went over the death god's words once more. Perhaps failure of the vessel referred to the destruction of the physical body rather than the death of the child's soul? If so, Kuishu began to laugh as he sent as much as possible out of the room, spreading it throughout the child's body. Same time. Outside the barrier. Saratobi stared helplessly at the barrier, vainly trying to see through the opaque bubble that enclosed his successor and the tailed beast. All around him, hundreds of ninja were pouring all their available chakra into the technique, fueling what was easily the largest barrier he had ever seen. He wouldn't be surprised if it was nearly half a mile in diameter. Now that he had nothing to do but wait, he found himself reflecting bitterly on the many mistakes he had made in the last 2 hours. He had sent far too many ninja on what amounted to a suicide mission, and he wondered even now if their deaths had accomplished anything at all. The rational side of himself knew that they had all volunteered, and he was proud of them all for their will of fire, but the guilt weighed heavily on his soul. It was a familiar guilt, and while these new burdens had plenty of company, that did not make them any easier to bear. But the worst burden of all, outweighing even the moment he had realized just how far his favored student had fallen, was waiting inside that barrier. He was released shortly after Minato turned over command of the battle, which he intended to do. He had known of Minato and Jiraiya's research into the Death God's seal and had even contributed some of the journals from his personal library. He just wished that he knew enough about sealing to do it himself. Minato was the most promising shinobi he had ever met, and even now he grew stronger and stronger. Minato had a wife who had just given birth and a son who should be able to enjoy life with both parents. Now that would never happen. Saratobi was drawn out of his musings as he noticed several ninja collapsing as they succumbed to chakra exhaustion. The genin and support ninja who lacked the necessary reserves to fuel the barrier moved in to assist them, but Saratobi could see that more and more ninja would be dropping soon. Even the experience looked shaky and pale from the chakra drain. He weighed his options at this point. He could send in fresh ninja and mandate the use of soldier pills and the 8 gates for those capable of it to extend the duration of the barrier. Such a course could cause irreparable damage to the ninja involved and would likely still only gain them another minute or two. On the other hand, he could drop the barrier now, while most of his forces still had some power left and could assist in the battle. Given the Fourth's plan, it was likely that matters within the barrier were already settled, one way or another. Nodding sharply, he made his decision. Attention all ninja. On my signal you are to drop the barrier and prepare to engage the tailed beast. His voice rang out. He could see the ninja around him gather themselves, determination warring with fear in their faces. He waited a few more seconds, then shouted, "Now!" The barrier flickered, then disappeared completely. Sarutobi himself led the charge into the now revealed clearing, only to falter as he surveyed the scene before him. The tailed beast was nowhere in sight. He could see evidence of a battle, as claw marks so large they might, as well as trenches were scattered throughout the area, and he could see impressions in the ground caused by Gamabunta leaping about. Gamabunta himself stood in the center of the clearing, eyes closed and head bowed. His sword was sheathed, and his pipe was stuck through his belt. Blood dripped from jagged wounds across his face and head, but the giant toad paid them no heed. Sarutobi moved forward to question Gamabunta, but his attention was suddenly diverted to the top of Gamabunta's head as a flare of chakra suddenly appeared. It was far, far weaker than what he had felt earlier in the day, but still unmistakably the tailed beast's chakra. He could also make out a baby crying at the top of its lungs. When he performed a shunshin to the top of Gamabunta's head, he found the chakra already receding back into the baby, leaving no visible mark that it had been there at all. The child continued to cry insistently until Sarutobi finally picked him up, at which point he quieted under the gentle rocking and quickly drifted off to sleep. He finally turned his attention to the figure lying nearby. Minato's eyes were still open, even in death, and his face was pale and drawn. The expression on his face was heart-wrenching, the pain and guilt he felt in his final moments was obvious. Sarutobi slowly knelt beside Minato's body and reached out with one shaking hand to close his eyes. He could feel tears streaming down his face, but he just let them flow. He pulled off his long scarf and laid it across Minato's head, then moved back down to the ground. He paused on his way down to speak into Gamabunta's ear. "I would like to ask you about what happened inside the barrier, but I need to see the village first. Can Jiraiya talk to you later?" Gamabunta gave a slight nod, his head still bowed in sorrow. The moment he arrived at Gamabunta's feet, he was surrounded by anxious ninja. None could voice their questions aloud, but their concerns were plain to see. Some were eyeing the bundle in Sarutobi's arms curiously, while a few were clearly already drawing conclusions about what had happened within the barrier. Sarutobi scanned the crowd and soon spotted Kakashi's distinct shock of white hair. "Kakashi?" Though his voice was low, it rang out in the silent clearing, as if he had shouted. "Please select 3 other ninja to serve as Minato's honor bearers." Our Sarutobi's voice broke from grief, but he forced the rest of the words out. "Our 4th Hokage has fallen in battle." -9 p.m. Konoha, Hokage's office. "Ah, Tsunade-chan, thank you for coming so quickly," Sarutobi said. He smiled slightly, but kept his attention on the bundle in his arms. "Well, whatever you need me for, just make it quick. I need to get back to the hospital. We've still got a lot of injured ninjas, not to mention all the ones with severe chakra exhaustion," Tsunade said quickly. She was looking around his office in irritation, so it actually took her a few moments to realize what he was holding in his arms. "Is that a baby?" Sarutobi chuckled. "I'm glad to see your skills haven't dulled over the years. This is indeed a baby. A very special baby, in fact." Tsunade growled under her breath, but moved closer, correctly assuming that she was summoned to check on the child's health. She froze a few steps away and then called out in shock, "Naruto?" Sarutobi nodded to himself, Tsunade's exclamation, all the confirmation he needed that, as he had expected, this was indeed Minato's son. Ah, so they did go with Naruto for his name after all. I thought they would. Old monkey, why are Kushina and Minato's kids here? Actually, where's Minato? Sarutobi finally turned his face towards her, and she was shocked to see his reddened eyes and tear-stained cheeks. Here, in this office, in front of one of his former students, he let his guard down and allowed his grief to show through. "You haven't heard?" he asked quietly, genuinely surprised. Tsunade shook her head slowly. "All the patients I was working on were in no condition to talk, and I came straight here when the Anbu summoned me. What haven't I heard?" She tried to ignore the foreboding feeling that had settled firmly in her gut and the echo of long-dead voices that were never far from her thoughts. Minato sacrificed himself to seal away the tailed beast. Given the beast's power, the only option was to seal it away into a child, the younger the better. I suspected he had chosen his own son as the vessel, and you have just confirmed that for me, Sarutobi said softly, turning back to look at Naruto again. His wrinkled hand smoothed back the small tufts of hair on Naruto's head as he continued to rock the baby gently back and forth. Tsunade closed her eyes and bowed her head, quietly absorbing the news. Sacrificing his own life to protect others sounded exactly like something Minato would do. Even as she thought about the fourth Hokage, the faces of Dan and Nawaki, her lover, and her younger brother, flashed through her mind. All three had dreamed of becoming Hokage and protecting the village, though only Minato had achieved his dream. Dan and Nawaki had both died long before they even had the chance. And now Minato is gone as well. Kushina would be. Tsunade looked up quickly. Does Kushina know? Sarutobi shrugged slightly. I honestly don't know. I sent an ambush squad to find her first, actually. I assumed she would still be in the hospital or perhaps back at their house. I expected her to arrive first, in fact. When was the last time you saw her? A few hours ago now, just after Naruto was born. The attack had started, and Shizune and I rushed out to see the wounded. Sarutobi frowned, wondering where Kushina could possibly be. He wouldn't put it past the incredibly stubborn woman to have charged out into the battlefield despite her weakened state, but he had seen no sign of her there, nor had he seen her rather unique style of. Well, I expect she will arrive before long in any case, he said, recalling the reason he had asked Tsunade to come in the first place. In the meantime, I would like you to look over young Naruto here. Konoha has no experience with ceiling-tailed beasts, so unfortunately we have no idea what to expect as far as his health and development is concerned. I also witnessed a beast chakra flaring up shortly after the sealing took place, though it hasn't happened since. Tsunade nodded slowly, then stood and made her way over to Sarutobi. She motioned him to place Naruto on the desk, then activated her medical. The moment she started her scan, she drew back with a low hiss. Sarutobi immediately went tense beside her, but waited for her to speak. Sensei, how is this seal supposed to work? I honestly don't know. Seals were never my area of expertise, that was Jiraiya and Minato's area. I know they've both been researching this seal for months now, so until I hear otherwise I would assume that it is functioning as intended. Why? There are trace amounts of the beast's chakra circulating throughout his entire body. Sarutobi's eyes widened. What? He yelled. Naruto began to fuss as he lay on the desk, and he forced himself to keep his voice quiet. What do you mean circulating? Well, everywhere blood and chakra flow there are also trace amounts of the beast's chakra. She reactivated her and began scanning again. She continued talking as she did so. It spread evenly throughout the body, not pooling in any one area that I can detect. It also seems to originate from behind his navel. I assume the seal was placed on his stomach? Over the view gate? She didn't bother to wait for his nod. I can't detect that it's causing any damage or deterioration, though I can't say what the effects will be in the long term. For the moment, I'd say it's actually helping, if anything. Sarutobi relaxed slightly as she spoke. Perhaps this was how the seal was supposed to function. There could certainly be a lot of benefits to having a secondary supply of chakra, though who knows if the beast's chakra worked in the same way as human chakra. In fact, he recalled descriptions of other vessels using powerful and unique techniques in the past, techniques that no one had managed to replicate. Perhaps this was part of the secret. Tsunade frowned suddenly. What the? Sarutobi waited for her to continue, but she remained silent, still frowning. What is it? He prompted. If there was some sort of reaction between the beast's chakra and Naruto's chakra, what little of it there is at his age. I've never seen chakra do that. Do what? He was getting rather annoyed at this point and was on the verge of activating his own technique just to see for himself. When the two chakras come in direct contact, it sort of vibrates. It doesn't seem to cause any damage or side effects, but how? Why? It vibrates? How in the world does chakra vibrate? Tsunade scowled and deactivated her. That's the best way I can describe it, alright? When two different chakras interact, they either blend together or repel one another. It's a basic tenet that all medics have to be aware of. I've healed thousands of ninja, and my chakra will either blend with or repel the patient's chakra. Always. She was starting to get worked up now, her face flushing and her voice rising. Medics train for years to learn how to handle the problems that interaction can cause. It's the foundation of modern medical ninjutsu. I have personally done years of research to explain and predict those reactions. I have never in my life seen chakra do that. Naruto started fussing again, louder this time, and Tsunade snapped her mouth shut and turned away, stomping off to fume in the corner while still muttering under her breath. Saratobi shook his head, torn between amusement at seeing Tsunade so passionate about yet another medical mystery and worried about what this could mean for Naruto. It was probable that this vibration was due to the beast's chakra rather than something unique to Naruto, but that didn't explain what was happening or why. So other than the oddity with the beast's chakra, he is in perfect health? Saratobi asked a few minutes later, seeing that Tsunade had calmed down and had moved past her ranting phase and onto her research planning phase. She nodded distractedly. Yeah, he's fine, every bit as good as when he was first born. Glad to hear it. Once Jiraiya gets here, I'll have him check the seal and confirm how it's supposed to work, then Kushina can take him home or wherever she would like to go. He mentally added a tally of at least 2, or, on further reflection, 4 squads of Anbu to her entourage. He wasn't about to risk losing Minato's wife and child to some enemy ninja who sensed an opportunity in the wake of the tailed beast's attack. He paused, then turned to face Tsunade. She could probably use some company in the days ahead, you know, he hinted not so subtly. Tsunade threw him an irritated glance. If you think I'm about to leave her alone while she's grieving over Minato and adjusting to being a mother, you're even more senile than I thought, old monkey. Saratobi smiled. Indeed, it is silly of me to think otherwise. Same time. Gaikai, the outer realm, Myabakuzen, exquisite tree mountain. Jiraiya landed nimbly on his feet as the reverse summoning spell ended, having completed its work in bringing him to the home of the Toad Summons. He took a moment to admire the gorgeous scenery around him. Lush forests and thundering waterfalls greeted his eyes wherever he looked. Even the buildings the toads had created had a way of blending into the forests around them. Konoha would always be his first home, but there were times when he was tempted to give up his work as a ninja and live in Myabakuzen. He had fought the temptation thus far, but every year it became just a little bit harder to resist the peaceful allure of this place and continue his work as a ninja. He knew one day, hopefully many years in the future, the toads would summon him to Myabakuzen, and he would no longer be able to find it within himself to leave. He shook his head. That day may be coming, but it was not today. Today he was here to learn about the last moments of his last and greatest student, Minato Namikaze, the man who had surpassed his teacher in nearly every respect, the man who had become Hokage before the age of 30, the man who he had hoped would succeed him as the Toad Sage. He greeted the other toads as he made his way to Gamabunta's dwelling. Word had already spread throughout the village if their solemn demeanor and consoling words were any indication. He let their words wash over him, thankful for their support, but unable to truly face his feelings on the matter at the moment. When he finally entered Gamabunta's home, he found the Toad Chief sitting quietly while his wife applied bandages to his face. Jiraiya was shocked to see that the wounds Gamabunta had taken in the battle with the tailed beast had remained after the summoning ended, that had never happened before, and he hadn't even known that it could happen at all. How are you still injured? Jiraiya blurted out. Gamabunta's eyes shifted to stare at Jiraiya. The tailed beast's power is not to be underestimated, he said firmly. Gamabunta then paused uncertainly, struggling to find the words to explain the situation. Their power is not like the power of humans. Because when the wounds they give us carry over, alright? Gamabunta finally shouted out, frustrated. Gamabunta's wife Gamatsuchi smacked him on the back of his head, scolding him for moving while she was fixing him. Jiraiya was rather surprised at Gamabunta's reaction to the question and a little concerned as well. He knew there were secrets that the toads kept from him concerning their own existence, but always before it had seemed like irrelevant details. Now he was certain the toads knew something very important and wanted to tell him, but couldn't. He thought about pressing for details, but his experience fishing for information that the toads didn't want him to have told him that would be a bad idea. He may have signed a contract with them, and he may have their respect and friendship, but there were clear limits. I see, Jiraiya said slowly, trying to convince himself of Gamabunta, and Gamatsuchi was not looking at him with pity when he said that. Well, that's not why I came here. I wanted to learn about what happened inside the barrier. You are the only one who can tell us anything. Gamabunta sighed and nodded, then began relating the events within the barrier from his perspective. When he was finished, Jiraiya looked over the notes he had hastily written down. All within Death's domain, and the barrier, huh? Guess that explains why all the trees and grass were dead, and why the summoner's life was taken. I guess the seal also protects the vessel from this, since Naruto survived the sealing. Makes sense, wouldn't be very useful otherwise, Jiraiya mused. He tapped the pen against his chin as he reviewed what he knew about the Death God's seal. That would explain that the third section in the left quadrant. Jiraiya trailed off, mumbling to himself as he assimilated this new information into his knowledge of the seal. Gamabunta shifted uneasily but said nothing. Jiraiya fell quiet for a time, then looked up at Gamabunta, tears beginning to form in his eyes. Did Minato say anything at the end? Gamabunta sighed heavily but shook his head. No, Jiraiya, he didn't. Knowing him though, I'm sure he left some sort of message behind, but he didn't say anything while I was there. There was no time. Gamabunta fell silent as Jiraiya forced back his tears and nodded slowly. Right. I'm sure he did, yeah, Jiraiya said, wiping his face and taking a long breath. Well, I need to let sensei know about all this. Thank you for telling me, Bunta, Jiraiya bowed in thanks, then turned to leave. Jiraiya, Gamabunta called out quietly. There's something else you need to know. The great Toad Sage has issued a new prophecy. He says that one of your students shall stand in the path of the vengeful spirit and that their clash shall reshape the world. Jiraiya felt rage wash over him. Well, all my students are fucking dead now, aren't they? The anger left as quickly as it had come, leaving a horrible empty feeling behind. They're all dead, he finished quietly. He turned and left the building without another word. Gamabunta sadly watched Jiraiya walk away. His last whispered comment barely managed to reach Jiraiya's ears. You aren't. Kuishu was not annoyed. Despite his success in taking over his vessel and restarting its vital functions, thus ensuring his own continued presence within the human realm, his initial experiments had already uncovered several limitations, even beyond the small amount available to him. The very first thing he tried was to extend his outside the confines of the vessel. It worked, but only to a point. Once he extended further than 2 feet, it was pulled back towards the vessel. The overall sensation was similar to when the Death God sealed him, but ceased once he was within the 2-foot boundary. By essentially throwing he could extend this range significantly, but he lost all control of the until it was inexorably pulled back to him. The sensation when that happened was disturbing. As well, he lost all awareness of that part of himself, and when it rejoined his main body there was only a memory of nothingness. He had no desire to experience that further and refrained from throwing his again. He hoped that the 2-foot boundary could be extended in the future, but for now his ability to interact with the world was severely limited. His next attempt was to form a solid shell around the body and use that to move around. If it worked, he could emulate his normal movements, if limited in size and scope. This attempt was also successful, but, again, only to a point. The amount he could pour into the shell, while still maintaining the body's vital functions, was incredibly small at this point, and the shell was paper thin. Kuishu was certain that the shell would not withstand even the weakest of attacks from his demon kin. The potential power of the human's chakra was currently unknown, but from what he remembered of the recent battle, any of his attackers would most likely be able to pierce the shell with little difficulty. Further testing was interrupted when the old human appeared and carried him from the battlefield. Kuishu felt the body reacting to the warmth and comfort offered by the human and made another discovery. With his spread throughout the body, as it was, he experienced everything the vessel did, as though it was his own body. The body also apparently functioned as a living being's wound, despite the presence of his. In this case, the body's functioning began to slow, though not to a harmful extent. In fact, this current state required even less to maintain than before. This must be the sleep that corporeal beings experience. While the body rested, Kuishu himself, and more importantly his senses, was unaffected. He couldn't see out of the vessel's eyes, as they were currently closed, but all the other senses continued to function. His own innate ability to sense the energies of the world around him was similarly unaffected. So he observed silently as the old human spoke to the other humans, then later wept and ranted in the privacy of his office. Kuishu understood the language well enough, but lacked the context to make sense of his words. Kuishu filed everything away as potentially useful information anyway. He was stuck in this human vessel for the time being and needed to adapt. Kuishu had feared discovery and death when the female human announced a presence of his, though she foolishly called it chakra, as if he were a human, but relaxed when the old human dismissed it as the proper functioning of the seal. For all Kuishu knew, the old human could be correct, though he personally suspected otherwise. He also paid close attention to the female's rant about the strange interaction between his and the vessel's chakra. This would merit further study. When the second male arrived and Kuishu decided he really needed to pay attention to names if he was going to pass as human, he listened closely to the discussion of the seal but learned nothing of value. The second male was very quiet, unusually so if the other's words were any indication, and did not go into any detail other than to say that the seal was intact. Kuishu also paid close attention to the confrontation that occurred when the other female barged into the room. It appeared there was discord within the human ranks, and he could potentially use this to his advantage. Which brought him back to his current circumstances. The second female, apparently the vessel's mother, if her words were any indication, had refused to put him down for hours on end. She had sought out the first female, and they had talked and wept together for some time, but had discussed nothing of relevance that Kuishu could determine. Even the irony of their resolution to not let anyone mistake the vessel for the tailed beast grew stale quickly. It was difficult to laugh at their lack of understanding given his current situation. And how they, along with the vessel, were asleep. He wanted to continue testing the limits of his current situation, but had already determined that any further flares, as they called them, would bring suspicion and mistrust upon him. Given his current helpless state, that was unacceptable. Then he noticed that the body seemed to be demanding sustenance, and increasing the flow or concentration of his to deal with it did nothing to alleviate the problem. After attempting to use the body's limbs to rouse the female currently holding him, he was forced to call out using the body's vocal cords. He, the Kyuubi no Yauko, was now a helpless babe crying for his mother's milk. Kuishu was not annoyed. He was furious. That his anger stirred him and only made the vessel cry louder did not appease him in the slightest. Same day. -8:55 a.m. Konoha, Hokage's Tower, Council Chambers. The council chambers located in the Hokage Tower were the traditional meeting place for the representatives of Konoha's government, both military and civilian. The room itself was large but sparsely decorated. 3 large tables arranged to form a triangle stood in the middle of the room. One table was reserved for the 10 elected civilian representatives, the second table was reserved for the representatives of the 10 most prominent or powerful ninja clans, and the last table was reserved for the Hokage, the Anbu commander, the Jounin commander, and any guests or representatives they chose to invite to the meeting. A few smaller tables were arranged along the walls, meant to hold food or refreshments for when the meetings ran long. The representatives were currently separated, with the ninja talking quietly to each other on one side of the room and the civilians mingling on the other. The civilian representatives on the council had spent most of the night with their families as they marveled at the fact that they had been spared destruction. A few of their number had ninja relatives, sometimes brothers or sisters, sometimes children, but for the most part their immediate families had come through unscathed. They considered their good fortune both a miracle and a testament to the power of their village. Their ninja counterparts had not fared nearly so well. The ninja appeared calm and stoic, but small gestures of comfort and commiseration could be seen as they heard of the losses each had sustained. Of the 10 shinobi clans which had a seat on the council, only 8 were currently present: the Aburame, Akamichi, Hyuga, Inuzuka, Nara, Senju, Uchiha, and Yamanaka clans. The Kiyomizu and Murakami clan seats were empty and would remain so. Those 2 clans had been on the decline in recent years and had been reduced to 7 and 5 members respectively. There had already been quiet talk of revoking their seats on the council and opening them up for other clans or representatives to occupy, but that was all moot now. All of the clan members had been active ninja, and all of them had perished in the battle against the tailed beast. While the other clans had survived, they had not done so unscathed. Shigeo Aburame had lost both of his parents and his wife, not to mention several other clan members. The Akamichi were traditionally close combatants and lost 2 members before it was determined they would be completely ineffective. The Hyuga, Inuzuka, Nara, and Uchiha had lost several members each, including Tsuminuzuka's husband, Kenichi. The Yamanaka were keeping it quiet for the moment, but several members had attempted to utilize their mind based against the Kyuubi and had yet to awaken. There was some hope they could still recover, but it diminished with each passing hour. The Senju clan, consisting solely of Tsunade Senju, was technically the only clan to come through the conflict without losses. At precisely 9 o'clock, the council doors opened, and Hiruzen Sarutobi strode into the chamber, accompanied by the Anbu commander in the traditional dragon mask and the current Jounin commander, Kensuke Saida. The room fell silent as their attention focused on the 3rd Hokage. In the years since his retirement, Sarutobi had relaxed considerably and allowed a more laid-back, genial personality to shine through. He was still involved in shinobi affairs in an advisory capacity, but generally appeared to be enjoying his retirement to the fullest. It was not uncommon to see him strolling through the village, enjoying the weather or idling in the park, simply observing the people of the village with a smile on his face. That was not the man who walked into the council chambers. This man walked firmly and with a clear sense of purpose, his eyes sharp and his face grim. Despite his nearly 60 years of age, there was no sign of weakness in his posture or gait, and everyone in the room sat a little straighter as they remembered why he was known as the god of shinobi. They remained silent as Sarutobi stopped before the chair reserved for the Hokage. He turned and faced the rest of the council, but pointedly did not sit. Normally Sarutobi would be accompanied by his two former teammates and closest advisors, Kohara Utatane and Homura Mitakato. Their absence likely meant that they had not survived the battle with the tailed beast. As everyone else took their seats, the Jounin commander cleared his throat and began the meeting. Ladies and gentlemen, you all know why we are here. Our village has suffered a catastrophic loss of life, and we must act swiftly and decisively to both protect the village and replenish our forces. Among our many losses was Namikaze Minato, our fourth Hokage, who gave his life performing a technique that ultimately ended the battle and prevented further loss of life. A moment of silence for our Hokage and our fallen comrades, please. Everyone in the chamber bowed their heads. After 10 seconds, Kensuke continued. Given this loss, our village is currently without a leader. As such, our first order of business is to appoint a new Hokage to lead us through this trying time. I hereby nominate Hiruzen Sarutobi, our previous third Hokage. Tsunade immediately spoke up. Seconded, she said firmly. She was echoed a moment later by the Anbu commander. The rest of the council quickly nodded in agreement, though Fugaku Uchiha hid a frown as he did so. The Jounin commander eyed the room for a moment, then spoke again. Does anyone have reason to object to this nomination? He almost managed to keep the smirk out of his voice as he did so, but several people in the room snorted, all of them amused at the thought of someone objecting to the god of shinobi. Are there any other nominations? Kensuke asked. He eyed the room warily this time. Despite Sarutobi's obvious qualifications and proven ability, there were at least two other people in the room who could make a serious argument for their own candidacy for Hokage, Fugaku Uchiha and Tsunade Senju. He personally didn't believe Tsunade would ever want the job despite her lineage and prowess, but Fugaku was another matter entirely. He possessed sufficient skill and more than his share of ambition, though he kept it tightly controlled in most circumstances. Sure enough, Kensuke could see irritation shining through Fugaku's carefully blank facade. While the comparison of Minato Namikaze and any other ninja in Konoha, with the possible exception of Sarutobi, would always end in Minato's favor, the comparison of a Sarutobi well past his prime and years into retirement against a much younger and actively serving Fugaku Uchiha was not so clear-cut. In terms of experience and skill, Sarutobi would win hands down, but his age worked against him now. Fugaku was 29 years old and was on the cusp of becoming an S-rank shinobi, and if appointed Hokage could conceivably enjoy a term of service nearly as long as Sarutobi's own. Sarutobi was still fit, but in 10 years he would be an old man, while Fugaku would be in the prime of his life. Kensuke stiffened slightly as Fugaku slowly stood and cleared his throat. It technically wasn't forbidden to nominate yourself for the position of Hokage, though in practice it had never been done. I think I speak for all of us when I say that I believe this village would be best served by appointing an experienced Hokage. I move that we vote immediately to appoint Sandaime-sama as our Hokage once more so that we can proceed to address the many pressing concerns facing our village. Fugaku spoke calmly and evenly, making eye contact with each person in the room in turn. He was looking directly at Sarutobi when he finished and held his gaze for a long moment before he sat down again. Kensuke was impressed despite himself. That little speech had probably done more to help Fugaku follow Sarutobi as Hokage than any amount of posturing could have. Everyone in the room knew of Fugaku's ambition and that he was willing to set it aside for the village spoke well of him, regardless of the motivations behind it. Nodding slightly at Fugaku in respect, Kensuke waited for someone to second the motion, and Tsunade once again lent her voice to the proceedings. The vote was unanimous. Sarutobi nodded sharply. I thank you all for your continued faith in me. The will of fire burns strong in all of you, And with your support we shall come through this stronger than ever, he said, then finally sat down. Our first order of business is to assess the current state of the village in the wake of the tailed beast's attack. Dragon has surveyed the damage to the village and conducted a head count of our ninja forces in preparation for this meeting. Dragon. The Anbu commander stepped forward and bowed. When the ninja spoke, the voice was distorted by the mask and unidentifiable as to age or even gender, but was still quite understandable. Yes, Lord Hokage. The damage to the village itself was minimal, limited to shattered glass and minor damage caused by the beast's roar, and incidental damage accrued during the evacuation. No buildings or infrastructure were damaged. The Anbu commander paused to gather his thoughts for a few moments, then continued. The survey of ninja forces reveals that 107 ninja have been confirmed dead, with an additional 231 unaccounted for and presumed dead. Stunned silence filled the chamber. The civilian representatives had been isolated from the battle itself, and while they understood the danger, had no idea the battle had gone so badly. The ninjas on the council knew things had been bad, but even they were shocked that so many had died. The Anbu commander continued. Of the 338 ninja confirmed or presumed dead, 17 were Anbu, 82 Jounin, 161 special Jounin, and the remaining 78 Chunin. In addition, there are 28 ninja, 2 Anbu, 7 Jounin, 3 special Jounin, and 16 Chunin, who are listed as permanently disabled. Analysis of mission capacity and defensive capability is ongoing, but initial estimates indicate that, including all ninjas who were away on missions during the attack, we have 7 ninjas cleared for S-rank missions and less than 30 cleared for solo A-rank missions. If we maintain our current defensive allocation, Konoha will experience nearly a 70% loss in mission income in the next year alone. Projections indicate that Konoha will be bankrupt or overrun within 3 years. Saratobi's head was bowed as he heard the death toll. 338 ninja dead on his orders while under his command. Only the death tolls of the second or third ninja wars compared, and those were spread out over years. This had happened in less than 3 hours. The other members of the council slowly digested the news. The civilians looked faintly ill, their previous belief that Konoha had been spared by some miracle feeling hollow now that the consequences were becoming clear. After a full minute of silent contemplation, as each member considered the situation, Saratobi spoke up. Our most pressing concern is the manpower available for missions. We can't decrease our defensive allocation. If anything, we'll need to increase it. The other villages will test us once word gets out about the attack, and if they sense weakness they will not hesitate to take advantage. We also can't allow income from missions to drop so far. I will request support from the Fire Lord, but I suspect we'll be lucky to get enough to cover 5% of our annual income, and that will dry up well before we have recovered. He has always maintained that the village should be self-sufficient, and his generosity will only extend so far. The logistics division will need to provide specifics, but for the purposes of this discussion, let us assume that we can allow income to drop to 80% of our current levels at most. In order to shore up our manpower, for the foreseeable future I will be placing the village on a limited war footing. All inactive ninja will be reactivated, including clan heads and clan elders. All leaves and vacations are hereby cancelled, and all reserve ninja will be called into active duty. Dragon, how many additional ninja does that give us? Dragon thought for a moment, then replied, in theory, that would provide us with 3 Anbu, roughly 40 additional Jounin, and 90 special Jounin, and over 200 Chunin. However, given how long some of those ninjas have been inactive, I would expect the special numbers to be significantly lower, at least in the short term. Saratobi nodded thoughtfully. I see. I am also increasing the percentage of pay per mission allotted to the village, up to an additional 25%. Again, the logistics division will provide more concrete numbers as our exact situation becomes clear. At the very least this should buy us some time to train or activate additional ninja. The shinobi representatives all winced, but no one voiced an objection. That measure would not be popular, even less popular than pulling some of their clan members out of their retirements. The majority of ninja, especially those without clans, lived off of their mission pay. An additional 25% would seriously impact their finances. In order to alleviate some of the increased demands on our ninja, I am also implementing subsidies for ninja housing and equipment. Any and all ninja will pay reduced prices for goods and services provided by civilians for as long as I deem necessary. The ninja relaxed slightly, nodding to themselves. They would likely still see less money overall, but this measure would help significantly and would make the situation much more palatable to the average ninja. Some of the civilians, on the other hand, frowned. They knew better than to interrupt at the moment, but they didn't see why it was necessary to cut into their own profits. They already supported the village through taxes and mission fees, and diverting even more of their funds to support the ninja seemed excessive. If the ninja needed more money, they should run more missions. The ninjas certainly weren't falling over themselves to spend more money at their stores when business was slow, now were they? Saratobi continued, filing away the reaction of the civilians for a later time. I want all of you to come up with additional ideas for either reducing spending or increasing income, preferably without levying additional taxes on the ninja population. Keep in mind that all ninja cleared for higher-ranked missions will likely be unavailable for some time. We will reconvene tomorrow morning for further discussion. However, before we break, there is one other matter that needs to be addressed. It relates to how the fourth Hokage was able to defeat the tailed beast. The ninja on the council nodded knowingly, though a look of anger briefly crossed Tsunade's face. Several people noted it, though no one knew what it was about. The civilians on the other hand appeared to be confused. 1. Naoki Taniguchi spoke up, the first civilian member of the council to do so since the meeting began. Ah, Hokage-sama, what do you mean? Didn't the fourth Hokage kill the beast? Saratobi shook his head. Actually, no, he didn't. No ninja has ever been able to kill a tailed beast, not even the weakest of them, the one-tailed. The fourth Hokage instead sealed the beast into a vessel. What is important is the means he used to do so. Minato, along with Jiraiya, was researching an obscure seal known as the all-consuming seal of the god of death. They both agreed that it was the most powerful seal currently in existence, and thus he chose it to seal the nine-tailed beast. He did so knowing that the price for using the seal would be his life. As I understand it, Minato initially planned to use the death god to kill the beast, or at the very least separate it from its power. Gamabunta, Minato's summon, was present during the sealing and told Jiraiya what happened inside the seal, and Jiraiya has since related those events to me. In short, the death god was unable to kill the tailed beast. Instead, the death god informed Minato that the beast would be sealed into a vessel and then banished for a period of 100 years once the vessel failed. The room relaxed, letting out a tension that had unknowingly been building since Saratobi began relating the events of the sealing. 100 years before the beast could possibly return to attack the village. The ninja, who were exposed to seals on a regular basis and had heard of the fate of the other tailed beasts, were already adding years, possibly decades, to that total as they considered the potential lifespan of the child selected to be the vessel. The civilians, who rarely encountered seals or concerned themselves with the details of ninja life, reached a rather different conclusion. Naoki spoke again, curiosity evident on his face. What is the vessel, Hokage-sama? Not what? Who? What? The fourth Hokage turned the beast into a person? Naoki shouted. Saratobi startled, surprised at Naoki's conclusion. No, he didn't turn the beast into a person, he sealed the beast into a baby. The child is the beast's prison, essentially. It requires a human being to contain a tailed beast, and the younger the child the more secure the seal, Saratobi replied, attempting to keep the explanation as simple as possible, mindful of the civilians' limited understanding of seals. Naoki slowly calmed down, then shook his head. I see, I suppose. That's rather unfortunate. At any rate, I assume the beast, or child, or whatever, has already been taken care of. Tsunade jumped to her feet. What is that supposed to mean? She yelled out, her fists clenched. Yoshikazu Nara frowned, beginning to piece together a disturbing picture as he recalled certain other facts relating to Tsunade, Minato, and Kushina. Several other ninjas were muttering to one another, wondering both about Tsunade's outburst and Naoki's odd question. Naoki shrank back, startled by her outburst. The Hokage just said that the beast would be banished for 100 years once the vessel failed. Since the vessel is a human being, I would assume that failure means death. It's a shame, but… Tsunade's face turned a particularly violent shade of red, and she became an indistinguishable blur as she leapt across the room, fully intending to punch Naoki through the floor and not particularly caring if he survived the experience. Only Dragon's swift reaction saved Naoki's life as the Anbu commander tackled him out of the way. Tsunade's fist passed through empty air before it met the floor and completely shattered it, peppering the other nearby counselors with shrapnel. The room descended into chaos. The civilians were scrambling out of the way, shouting in fear or outrage, while the ninja moved to restrain Tsunade. Yoshikazu's shadow connected with Tsunade and froze her in place, while the Akimichi councilman grabbed her arms and the Hyuga councilman had his Byakugan activated and was poised to disable her at a moment's notice. Naoki himself appeared to be stunned, even as Dragon lifted him to his feet. It took him several seconds to gather himself, but his voice finally cut through the din. Why did you just tried to kill me?" he exclaimed. Tsunade snarled at him, her face still flushed red with anger, but made no reply. Naoki sputtered for a moment and was about to continue when Saratobi interrupted him. "Councilman Taniguchi," Saratobi said, his voice cold and harder than steel. "You have just implied that I, either personally or through an intermediary, have taken part in the premeditated murder of a newborn infant. Explain yourself." Naoki paled dramatically, sensing Saratobi's displeasure. Nonetheless, he calmed himself and straightened his jacket before addressing the room. "My apologies, Hokage-sama, I must have misspoken. I merely meant that, given the situation, it seemed prudent to eliminate the risk of the tailed beast's return as quickly and thoroughly as possible. I do not claim to understand the fourth Hokage's plans or actions, but you yourself stated that the sealing did not proceed as intended. Given that, we cannot know for certain the state of the seal or how effective it will be. Further, you quoted the god of death himself as stating that once the seal failed, the tailed beast would be banished from the human realm for 100 years. As such, if we deliberately cause the failure of the seal, then we can guarantee 100 years of safety from this threat. I had originally assumed that the vessel spoken of was an object of some sort. It is tragic that a human being was sacrificed in this manner, but I would hope that whoever the child's parents are, they are secure in the knowledge that their sacrifice has ensured the safety of the village for many years to come." The whole room listened in stunned silence as Naoki laid out his reasoning. The ninja were forced to admit that his argument was logical, if somewhat off base. Tsunade had resumed her efforts to attack the counselor part-way through his explanation, but was firmly held in place by the combined efforts of the ninja around her. Naoki sensed that the ninja on the council did not agree with his perfectly reasonable explanation and desperately sought to divert attention away from the topic at hand, if only slightly. A bit of flattery wouldn't hurt either, he thought. He spoke again as an idea occurred to him. In fact, Hokage-sama, you haven't mentioned the identity of the child or its parents. They should be recognized throughout the village as heroes for their sacrifice. Who is the vessel? Saratobi had originally intended to rebuke the councilman for his insinuations and correct his flawed logic, but found himself at a loss. Technically, everything he had said was true. The sealing did not go as intended, the beast would be banished if the child died, and, though he hated the very thought, killing the child would ensure 100 years of peace. As Naoki, and apparently most of the civilians, believed the seal to be faulty in some fashion, they would not accept that every day the child lived was another day added to that 100-year total. Even as his mind cast about for a way to explain the situation that would remove thoughts of murder from their minds, he heard Naoki's next question. Several scenarios where word of Naruto's identity spread throughout the village and would-be heroes sought to slay the beast occurred to him, and he responded swiftly to eliminate that threat. "No, I have not told you his identity, nor will I. From this moment forward, the identity of the vessel of the tailed beast is an S-rank secret and will be protected as such. If you betray this secret to anyone who does not already know it, you will be executed immediately," Saratobi declared. He would be damned if he allowed any harm to come to Minato's child, especially from overzealous fools. Furthermore, Councilman Taniguchi, you are correct when you state that you do not understand the fourth Hokage's plans or actions and should keep that in mind before you attempt to interfere with ninja affairs in the future. This matter is closed to discussion and will not be brought up in the future. Am I understood? Naoki gaped in shock as the Hokage summarily dismissed his concerns. He nodded slowly, knowing that any other response would likely only make his situation worse. That goes for everyone else, as well. Saratobi continued, sending a sharp glare around the room. The other ninja nodded sharply, most understanding his reasoning and recognizing that the identity of a tailed beast vessel was often considered an S-rank secret anyway. Tsunade finally appeared to be calming down after Saratobi had dealt with the situation to her satisfaction, though she occasionally sent a nasty glare in Naoki's direction. "Good. We will reconvene tomorrow morning, and I expect to hear some useful ideas on how to strengthen our village." "Dismissed," Saratobi said, and quickly exited the room. The other ninja followed on his heels, most already creating lists of which ninja in their clans could be reactivated and which would need to be trained until they were once again fit for duty. Tsunade spared one last glare for Naoki before she stalked out of the room, muttering incoherently under her breath. Fugaku Uchiha was the last ninja to exit the room, a speculative look in his eyes as he reviewed the events of the meeting. Naoki continued to gape as the ninja filed out of the room. "That's it? She tried to kill me. You aren't going to do anything about that?" he asked, half to himself. Apparently not, if the empty seats in the room were any indication. He shared a disbelieving look with some of his fellow counselors who had remained in the room, all of them wondering just how much had changed in the last 24 hours. Thanks for watching my video. Leave a like if you enjoyed my video, and also do consider subscribing to my channel for more awesome content. If you want the next part of this story, let me know in the comment box. See you next time. Till then, sayonara.